The widow stood in the dusty main street of Fort Lyon, Colorado, while Martha Henderson's shrill voice carried across the afternoon air like a crow's caw, announcing to anyone within earshot that Theresa Palmer had neither money nor prospects and ought to leave respectable society alone before she contaminated the other women with her poverty. It was June of 1878, and the scorching sun beat down on Theresa's black mourning dress as she clutched her market basket tighter, trying to maintain what little dignity remained after 6 months of such treatment. Her husband Robert had died the previous winter from pneumonia, leaving her with nothing but debts and a small cabin on the edge of town. The other widows had married men of means, women who brought land or livestock or cash money into their second marriages. Theresa had only her 2 hands and a stubborn refusal to give up, which apparently meant nothing in Fort Lyon's rigid social hierarchy. "I heard she is trying to find work at the saloon," Martha continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Poor dear has no other options, does she? No family to take her in, no dowry to attract a decent man." Theresa felt her cheeks burn, but she kept walking toward the general store. She needed flour and beans, and she had just enough coins from taking and mending to afford the basics. Let them talk. She had survived worse than gossip. The general store was blessedly cool inside, and Mr. Chen, the proprietor, greeted her with his usual quiet courtesy. He was one of the few people in town who treated her the same as he always had, before Robert's death had transformed her from a respectable married woman into something to be pitied and scorned. "Mrs. Palmer," he said with a slight bow, "how may I help you today?" "5 pounds of flour and 3 pounds of beans, please," Theresa said, setting her coins on the counter. She counted them twice to make sure she had enough. As Mr. Chen measured out her purchases, the door opened behind her and she heard the distinctive jingle of spurs. She did not turn around, focusing instead on watching Mr. Chen's careful movements with the scales. "Afternoon, Mr. Chen," a deep male voice said. "I need supplies for a week on the trail. Dried beef, hardtack, coffee, and whatever fruit you have that will keep." "Of course, Mr. Quincy," Mr. Chen replied. "I will prepare that for you right away." Theresa glanced sideways and saw a tall man in dusty trail clothes standing a few feet away. He had removed his hat upon entering, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was sun-weathered and angular, with gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. She looked away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring. "That will be 47 cents, Mrs. Palmer," Mr. Chen said, wrapping her purchases in brown paper. She counted out the coins carefully, then realized she was 3 cents short. Her heart sank as she recounted, hoping she had made a mistake, but the total remained the same. "I apologize, Mr. Chen," she said quietly, her face burning with embarrassment. "I will have to return the beans." "Just the flour, please." Mr. Chen's expression did not change, but she saw sympathy in his eyes as he began to unwrap the package. "Wait," the cowboy said, stepping forward. He placed a silver dollar on the counter. "Add her beans to my order and give me 2 pounds of sugar as well." Theresa turned to face him, her pride warring with her desperate need. "I cannot accept charity, sir." The cowboy looked at her directly for the first time, and something in his steady gaze made her breath catch. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment, just a quiet assessment that seemed to see past her shabby dress and worn shoes to something deeper. "Not charity, madam," he said. "I have been where you are, standing in a store without enough money for what I needed. Someone helped me once. I am just passing it forward." His words were simple and matter-of-fact, without any false sympathy or condescension. Theresa found herself nodding, accepting the kindness because refusing would make more of a scene than accepting. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very kind." "Lucas Quincy, madam," he said, extending his hand. "Most folks call me Luke." She hesitated only a moment before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused from hard work. "Theresa Palmer." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Palmer." He released her hand and turned back to Mr. Chen. "Now, about those supplies." Theresa gathered her packages, murmured another thank you, and hurried out of the store before her emotions could overwhelm her. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness without expecting something in return or using it as an excuse to remind her of her lowly position. She was halfway home when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned to see Lucas Quincy riding a handsome bay horse, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. "Mrs. Palmer," he called, reining in beside her. "I am heading west. Mind if I ride along with you for a bit? This sun is fierce, and I would feel better knowing you made it home safely." "I have walked this road 100 times, Mr. Quincy," she said, "but without heat. I am quite capable of managing alone." "I am sure you are," he agreed, dismounting. "But I would appreciate the company if you do not mind. Gets lonely on the trail, and I have been riding alone for 3 days." There was something disarming about his honesty. He was not pretending to be her protector or suggesting she needed help. He was simply asking for company, treating her as an equal rather than an object of pity. "Very well," she said. "My cabin is about a mile west of town." They walked together, Luke leading his horse and mule. For a while, neither spoke, and Theresa found the silence comfortable rather than awkward. The road stretched ahead of them, lined with cottonwood trees that provided occasional shade from the brutal afternoon sun. "How long have you been in Fort Lyon?" Luke finally asked. 3 years, Theresa replied. "My husband and I came here from Ohio. He wanted to try ranching, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of the dead. "But it did not work out," Luke finished gently. "Robert was a good man," Theresa said carefully. "But he was a clerk, not a rancher. He tried so hard, but the land here is unforgiving and he did not know enough about cattle. When he died last winter, there were more debts than assets. I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but something in his tone told her he meant them sincerely. She glanced at him and saw genuine sympathy in his expression, not the false kind that people use to mask their judgment. "What brings you to Fort Lyon?" she asked, wanting to change the subject. "Work," Luke said. "I have been hired to help drive a herd up to Wyoming. The rancher, James Morrison, needs experienced hands, and I have been working cattle since I was 12 years old." "You are a long way from home, then," Theresa observed. "Your accent sounds like Texas." Luke smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Good ear. I grew up outside San Antonio, left home at 16 to work the ranches, and I have been drifting north ever since. How about you? Ohio born and raised." "Born in Pennsylvania, but I moved to Ohio when I was 10 after my parents died," Theresa said. "My aunt raised me, but she passed away just before I married Robert. It was just the two of us after that." "No other family?" Theresa shook her head. "Robert had a brother in California, but they had not spoken in years. After Robert died, I wrote to him, but I never received a reply." They walked on, and Theresa found herself relaxing in Luke's presence. He did not press her with questions or offer unwanted advice. He simply listened, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. Her cabin came into view, small and weathered but sturdy. Robert had built it with his own hands, and whatever his failings as a rancher, he had been a decent carpenter. The roof did not leak, and the walls kept out the worst of the winter cold. "This is it," Theresa said, stopping at the gate. The small garden she had planted was struggling in the heat, but the vegetables were growing. "Thank you for walking with me, Mr. Quincy." "Luke," he corrected gently. "And thank you for the company, Mrs. Palmer." Theresa, she found herself saying, if we are being informal. His smile widened slightly. Theresa, that is a pretty name. She felt her cheeks warm and cursed herself for blushing like a schoolgirl. Would you like some water before you go? I have a well that stays cold. That would be much appreciated, Luke said, tying his horse and mule to the fence post. Theresa led him around to the back of the cabin where the well stood in the shade of a large cottonwood. She drew up a bucket of water and poured it into 2 tin cups, handing one to Luke. He drank deeply, then sighed with satisfaction. That is good water, cold and clean. It is one of the few things about this property that Robert got right, Theresa said, then immediately felt guilty for the criticism. Luke did not seem to judge her for the comment. Sounds like he tried his best with what he knew. He did, Theresa agreed softly. It just was not enough. They stood in the shade, drinking the cold water, and Theresa felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope, a feeling she had not experienced in months. When do you start working for Mr. Morrison? She asked. Day after tomorrow, Luke said. I am staying at the boarding house in town until then. Mrs. O'Brien has decent rooms and serves good food. She does, Theresa agreed. I used to help her with the laundry before. She stopped, not wanting to explain how Martha Henderson had convinced Mrs. O'Brien that having a penniless widow working in the boarding house would drive away respectable customers. Luke's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he understood what she was not saying. People can be cruel when they are afraid. Afraid of what? Theresa asked, genuinely puzzled. Afraid that bad luck is contagious, Luke said. Afraid that if they are kind to someone down on their luck, they might end up the same way. It is easier to judge than to help, easier to look away than to see another person suffering. His words struck her deeply because they were true. She had seen it in the eyes of women who had once been her friends, the way they turned away when she approached, as if poverty were a disease they might catch. That is very perceptive, she said quietly. Luke shrugged. I have seen it before, experienced it myself once upon a time. What happened? Theresa asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. I apologize. That is none of my business. No, it is all right, Luke said. He set down his cup and looked out at the dusty landscape. My family lost everything when I was 15. Drought killed our cattle, and my father had borrowed money against the ranch to buy more stock. When we could not pay, the bank took everything. My mother died that winter from the strain, and my father just gave up. Drank himself to death within a year. I am so sorry, Theresa said, touching his arm without thinking. Luke looked down at her hand, then back at her face. It was a long time ago, but I learned something from it. I learned that the measure of a person is not what they own or what they have lost, but how they treat others when they have the power to help or hurt. Theresa pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. What you did today in the store, that was very kind. It was nothing, Luke said, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. It was everything, Theresa said softly. You have no idea how long it has been since someone treated me like I mattered. Something shifted in Luke's expression, a tenderness that made Theresa's breath catch. You matter, he said simply. Do not let anyone tell you different. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Theresa could not quite name. Then Luke cleared his throat and picked up his hat, which he had set on the edge of the well. I should go, he said. I need to check in with Mr. Morrison before evening. Of course, Theresa said, trying to hide her disappointment. Thank you again for everything. Luke nodded, then hesitated. Would it be all right if I called on you tomorrow? I would like to hear more about Fort Lyon, get a sense of the area before the drive. Theresa knew she should say no. Getting attached to a cowboy who would be leaving in 2 days was foolish. But the hope in her chest fluttered stronger, and she found herself nodding. "I would like that," she said. Luke's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. I will bring something for supper if that is all right." "You do not have to," Theresa began, but Luke shook his head. "I want to," he said firmly. "Please, let me do this." Theresa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as Luke mounted his horse and tipped his hat to her before riding back toward town. Only when he was out of sight did she let herself lean against the well, her heart pounding in her chest. She should not let herself hope. She should not let herself feel anything for a man she had just met, a man who would be leaving soon. But as she carried her packages inside and began to put away her meager supplies, she could not stop the smile that curved her lips or the lightness in her step. That evening, Theresa pulled out her best dress, a blue calico that she had not worn since before Robert's death. It needed mending in a few places, and the hem was frayed, but it was better than her mourning black. She worked by lamplight, her needle flying through the fabric as she repaired the damage and let out the waist a bit. Grief and poverty had made her thin, and the dress hung loose on her frame. As she worked, she thought about Lucas Quincy and the way he had looked at her. Not with pity or judgment, but with respect and something that might have been interest. It had been so long since a man looked at her that way, since anyone made her feel like more than a burden or an inconvenience. She knew she was being foolish. Luke was a drifter, a cowboy who worked from ranch to ranch with no permanent home. Even if he was interested in her, what future could they have? She had a cabin and a small plot of land, tied to Fort Lyon by poverty and circumstance. He had freedom and the open trail, unencumbered by attachments or responsibilities. But as she finished mending her dress and hung it carefully on a peg, she let herself hope anyway. Tomorrow he would come, and they would have supper together, and for a few hours she could pretend that her life might hold more than endless struggle and loneliness. The next morning, Theresa was up before dawn. She swept the cabin until not a speck of dust remained, scrubbed the floor, and aired out her quilts. Then she went to her garden and picked what vegetables were ready. A few tomatoes, some beans, and a handful of herbs. It was not much, but she could make a decent stew if Luke brought meat. She bathed in the wash basin, heated on her small stove, and washed her hair with the last of her precious lavender soap. The scent brought back memories of better times, when Robert was alive and they were poor but hopeful, before the debts and the dying cattle and the final harsh winter that took him from her. By early afternoon, she was dressed in her mended blue dress, her hair brushed and pinned up neatly. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress brought out the blue of her eyes, and the careful mending hid the worst of the wear. She looked almost pretty, almost like the woman she had been before grief and hardship had aged her beyond her 24 years. She was checking the stew pot when she heard hoofbeats outside. Her heart jumped, and she had to force herself to walk calmly to the door rather than run like an excited child. Luke was dismounting from his horse, and he held a wrapped package in one hand and a small bunch of wildflowers in the other. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair damp and combed back, his shirt pressed and tucked neatly into his pants. He looked younger somehow, and Theresa realized he could not be much older than 30. "Good afternoon," he called, approaching the cabin with the flowers extended. "I found these growing by the creek, thought they might brighten up your cabin." Theresa took the flowers, feeling absurdly touched by the gesture. No one had given her flowers since her wedding day. "They are beautiful, thank you." "Not half as beautiful as you," Luke said, then looked almost surprised at his own boldness. "That dress is a pretty color, matches your eyes." Theresa felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Thank you. Come in, please. I have stew started if you brought meat like you mentioned." Luke held up the package. 2 pounds of good beef from the butcher. He said it was the best he had. They worked together to add the meat to the stew, and Theresa was surprised by how comfortable it felt, having Luke in her small cabin. He did not get in her way or try to take over, just moved easily around the space, finding the plates and utensils without having to ask where they were kept. "You seem at home in a kitchen," Theresa observed. "That is unusual for a cowboy." Luke grinned. "When you live alone on the trail, you learn to cook or you starve. I'm not saying I am good at it, but I can make a decent meal when I need to." They sat down to eat at her small table, and Theresa was acutely aware of how intimate it felt, sharing a meal with this man she barely knew. The stew was good, the beef tender and the vegetables flavorful, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. "Tell me about the cattle drive," Theresa said eventually. "What will you be doing?" "We are moving about 2,000 head from Morrison's ranch here up to his new property in Wyoming," Luke explained. "It is about a month's drive through some rough country. My job is to ride the flanks, keep the herd moving in the right direction and watch for stragglers or trouble." "Trouble?" Theresa asked. "Rustlers, mostly," Luke said. "Sometimes storms or river crossings cause problems. It is hard work but honest, and Morrison pays fair wages." "Will you come back to Fort Lyon after?" Theresa asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Luke was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "I had not planned to," he said honestly. "I usually move on after a drive, find new work somewhere else, but I might have a reason to come back now." Theresa's heart skipped. "Oh, I met someone yesterday," Luke said softly. "Someone I would like to know better." Theresa set down her spoon, her hands trembling slightly. "Luke, I know it is fast," he said quickly. "I know we just met, and you are probably thinking I am crazy or presumptuous, but I felt something yesterday when I met you, Theresa. Something I have not felt in a long time." "What did you feel?" Theresa whispered. "Like I had been looking for something my whole life without knowing it," Luke said. And suddenly, there it was, standing in a general store counting pennies with more dignity and grace than most rich women could manage. Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. "I have nothing to offer you," she said. "No money, no land worth mentioning, no family connections. I am a widow with debts and a cabin that barely keeps out the cold. You could do so much better." Luke reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and solid and real. "You bring everything I need," he said firmly. "Your strength, your dignity, your kindness. The way you keep going even when everyone around you tries to push you down. That is worth more than all the money or land in the world." A tear escaped and rolled down Theresa's cheek. "You barely know me." "Then let me know you better," Luke said. "I have to leave day after tomorrow, but I will be back in 6 weeks. Will you wait for me? Will you give me a chance to prove that I mean what I say?" Theresa wanted to say yes more than she had wanted anything in a long time. But fear held her back, the fear of hoping again only to be disappointed, of letting herself care only to be left alone. "What if you change your mind?" she asked quietly. "What if you get to Wyoming and realize you were just being kind to a woman down on her luck?" Luke stood up and came around the table. He knelt beside her chair and took both her hands in his. "Look at me," he said gently. Theresa met his eyes, those steady gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "I will not change my mind," Luke said. "I know myself, Theresa. I know what I want, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. I am asking you to wait 6 weeks. Just 6 weeks. And when I come back, if you decide you do not want anything to do with a drifting cowboy, I will respect that and move on. But if you give me a chance, I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Theresa searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity or false promise. She found none, only honest hope and determination. "Yes," she whispered, "I will wait." Luke's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. Theresa wrapped her arms around him and let herself be held, let herself feel safe and cherished for the first time in longer than she could remember. They stayed like that for a long moment, then Luke pulled back just enough to look at her face. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Theresa nodded, her heart racing, and Luke leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. Theresa felt something deep inside her begin to heal, some broken part of her soul starting to mend. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Luke rested his forehead against hers. "6 weeks," he murmured. "I will count every day." "So will I," Theresa whispered back. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, talking about everything and nothing. Luke told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could barely walk, about the years after his parents died when he worked odd jobs and saved every penny. Theresa told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her aunt who taught her to sew and cook and manage a household, about meeting Robert and believing they could build a good life together. As the sun began to set, Luke reluctantly said he needed to get back to town. "I have an early start tomorrow, need to help Morrison sort through supplies before we leave." They walked together to his horse, and Luke pulled her close for one more kiss before mounting. "I will write to you from the trail when I can," he promised, "and I will be back before you know it." "Be safe," Theresa said, her throat tight with emotion. "Always," Luke replied. He tipped his hat to her, then rode away into the gathering dusk. Theresa stood by her gate long after he was out of sight, her fingers touching her lips where he had kissed her. 6 weeks. She could wait 6 weeks. The next morning, Theresa woke with a sense of purpose she had not felt in months. She had 6 weeks to prove to the people of Fort Lyon that she was more than just a poor widow. 6 weeks to build something for herself so that, when Luke came back, he would not be taking on a burden but partnering with someone who could stand on her own. She walked into town with her mending basket full of finished work, determined to find more customers. She would not let Martha Henderson or anyone else define who she was or what she was worth. The first person she approached was Mr. Chen at the general store. "I was wondering if you might know anyone who needs sewing done," she said. "I do mending, alterations, and I can make new clothes from scratch if someone has fabric." Mr. Chen considered for a moment. "My wife has been overwhelmed with orders," he said. "She makes clothes for several families, but her eyesight is not what it used to be. Would you be willing to work with her?" "I would be honored," Theresa said, relief flooding through her. Mr. Chen nodded. "Come to dinner tonight and you can meet her. Her name is May, and she will appreciate having help with the fine detail work." Theresa left the general store feeling lighter than she had in months. She spent the rest of the day visiting other businesses, offering her services, and by evening she had 3 more commissions: a dress for Mrs. O'Brien at the boarding house, curtains for the new schoolteacher, and mending for the doctor's family. That evening she went to the Chen's home behind the general store. May Chen was a small, elegant woman with sharp eyes and quick hands. She looked at Theresa's samples of work and nodded approvingly. "You have skill," May said, "and you need work. I have work but need help. We will work together, split the profits fairly." "Thank you," Theresa said, feeling tears threaten again. "You have no idea what this means to me." May reached out and patted her hand. "I know exactly what it means. I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back. People judged me for my accent, for my appearance, for being different. But I worked hard and I earned respect. You will too. Over the next weeks, Theresa fell into a routine. She spent her mornings tending her garden and doing chores, her afternoons working with May on sewing projects, and her evenings mending by lamplight. The work was hard, but it was honest, and slowly her pile of coins began to grow. The women of Fort Lyon began to look at her differently as word spread that she was working with May Chen. May had earned grudging respect for her skill and business acumen, and by association, Theresa began to be treated less like an object of pity and more like a respectable tradeswoman. 3 weeks after Luke left, Theresa received her first letter. It was brief, written in neat, careful handwriting on rough paper. Dear Theresa, we are halfway to Wyoming and the drive is going well. The weather has been fair and we have not lost more than a dozen head. I think about you every day, about that blue dress and your smile and the way you taste like hope. I cannot wait to get back to you. 3 more weeks. Yours, Luke. Theresa read the letter a dozen times, tracing the words with her finger. She slept with it under her pillow and carried it with her during the day, a tangible reminder that Luke was real, that his promise was real. She wrote back immediately, telling him about her work with May, about the slow change in how people treated her, about how her garden was thriving despite the heat. She told him she was waiting, that she thought of him constantly, that she was counting the days. 4 weeks after Luke left, Martha Henderson confronted Theresa outside the general store. I heard you have been seeing that drifter Cowboy, Martha said, her voice loud enough to attract attention. You should know better than to set your sights on a man like that. He will use you and leave you, mark my words. For once, Theresa did not shrink back or try to avoid confrontation. She stood tall and met Martha's gaze directly. Lucas Quincy is twice the person you will ever be, she said clearly. He judges people by their character, not their bank balance. Something you might consider trying. Martha gasped, her face reddening. How dare you speak to me like that? You are nothing but a penniless widow with no prospects. I am a working woman who pays her debts and treats people with respect, Theresa said. That is more than I can say for someone who spreads gossip and cruelty like poison. She walked away before Martha could respond, her heart pounding but her head held high. Behind her, she heard murmurs of approval from the small crowd that had gathered. Not everyone agreed with Martha, she realized. Some people had just been afraid to speak up. That evening, Mrs. O'Brien stopped by Theresa's cabin with a basket of food. I heard what you said to Martha Henderson today, the boarding house owner said. It was about time someone stood up to that woman. I wanted to apologize for letting her convince me not to hire you for the laundry. That was wrong of me. Thank you, Theresa said, surprised and touched. The apology means a lot. If you ever need work, you come to me, Mrs. O'Brien said firmly. And that cowboy of yours can stay for free when he gets back. Any man who makes you smile like you have been smiling these past weeks is worth knowing. 5 weeks after Luke left, Theresa had enough money saved to pay off half of Robert's remaining debts. She visited the bank and made the payment, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The bank manager looked surprised but pleased. At this rate, Mrs. Palmer, you will have the debts cleared in another 3 months, he said. That is quite an accomplishment. Thank you, Theresa said. I intend to pay every penny I owe. She walked out of the bank feeling proud of herself, proud of what she had accomplished. She was building a real life, a sustainable life, and when Luke came back, she would be able to stand beside him as an equal, not as someone who needed rescuing. 6 weeks to the day after Luke left, Theresa woke before dawn with butterflies in her stomach. He would be back today or tomorrow, depending on how long the final delivery took. She put on her blue dress, now carefully cleaned and pressed, and spent the morning trying to keep busy while watching the road. By afternoon, she could not stand the waiting anymore. She walked into town, ostensibly to deliver finished work to May, but really hoping to hear news of the cattle drive's return. She was walking past the saloon when she heard hoofbeats, lots of them. She turned to see a group of dusty, tired cowboys riding into town, driving their horses toward the livery stable. Her heart jumped, scanning the faces, looking for Luke. Then she saw him, riding at the back of the group, looking exhausted but whole. Their eyes met across the distance, and Luke's face transformed with joy. He said something to the other cowboys, then turned his horse and rode straight toward her. Theresa did not care who was watching or what anyone thought. She ran to meet him, and Luke dismounted while his horse was still moving, catching her up in his arms and spinning her around. "You are here," Theresa gasped, holding him tight. "You came back." "I told you I would," Luke said, setting her down but not letting go. "Did you doubt me?" "Not for a second," Theresa said, and realized it was true. Despite all her fears and worries, some part of her had known with absolute certainty that Luke would keep his promise. Luke pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You look beautiful, even more beautiful than I remembered." "You look exhausted," Theresa said, touching his face. "And you need a shave and a bath." Luke laughed. "Probably true, but first I need to do this." He leaned down and kissed her right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw or what they thought. Around them, Theresa heard murmurs and whispers, but for once she did not care. Let them talk. Luke was back, and he was kissing her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was everything he needed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke kept his arms around her. "I need to check in with Morrison, get my pay, and deal with my horse. Will you wait for me at your cabin? I will come as soon as I can." "I will wait forever if I have to," Theresa said, meaning every word. Luke kissed her again, quick and hard, then reluctantly let her go. 1 hour, 2 at most. "I promise." Theresa walked home in a daze, barely aware of the stares and whispers following her. She tidied her already tidy cabin, checked her appearance in the mirror a dozen times, and paced restlessly. She had so much to tell him, so much she wanted to share. True to his word, Luke arrived less than 2 hours later. He had bathed and shaved and changed into clean clothes, and he looked younger and more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He also carried a saddlebag that looked heavy. "I brought my things," he said, a little hesitantly. "I hoped." "I mean, if you still want." "I want," Theresa said quickly. "I want whatever you are willing to give me." Luke set down his bag and pulled her close. "I meant what I said before I left. I spent 6 weeks thinking about you, about us, about what kind of life we could build together. And I want all of it, Theresa. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to make a home with you, raise a family, grow old together. I know I do not have much, but I have honest work and strong hands and a heart that is completely yours." Theresa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Luke let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had in town. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said, setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they finally came up for air, Theresa pulled back to look at him seriously. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about what I have been doing while you were gone." She told him about working with May, about the sewing commissions, about paying down the debts and standing up to Martha Henderson. Luke listened intently, his expression growing prouder with every word. "That is incredible," he said when she finished. "You did all that in 6 weeks." "I wanted to prove that I could stand on my own," Theresa said. "That I was not just someone who needed rescuing. I wanted to be a partner, not a burden." Luke cupped her face in his hands. "You were never a burden," he said firmly, "but I understand why you needed to prove it to yourself. And I am so proud of you for doing it." "What will you do for work?" Theresa asked. "Now that the drive is over, Morrison offered me a permanent position as foreman on his ranch," Luke said. "Good pay, steady work, and a cabin that goes with the job, but I told him I needed to talk to you first." "Why?" Theresa asked, confused. "Because you have this cabin and your business with May and roots here in Fort Lyon," Luke explained. "I will not ask you to give that up. We can live here and I will find work locally. I can break horses or hire on at one of the other ranches. I am not going to make you choose between your life and me." Theresa felt her heart swell with love for this man who put her needs and wants before his own ambitions. "What do you want?" she asked softly. Luke was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Honestly, I would love to work as Morrison's foreman. It is the kind of position that could lead to having our own small herd someday, building real security. But only if you are all right with it." "How far is Morrison's ranch from town?" Theresa asked. "About 5 miles, Luke said. "Close enough that you could still work with May if you wanted, though it would be a longer trip." Theresa considered. "What if we split the difference? Live at Morrison's cabin during the week when you are working and come here on your days off. That way I can keep my business going, but you can take the position you want." Luke looked at her with such love and admiration that Theresa felt her breath catch. "That is brilliant," he said. "Are you sure? It would mean a lot of traveling back and forth." "I am sure," Theresa said. "We will make it work together." "Together," Luke repeated, pulling her close again. "I like the sound of that." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future, and reveling in being together again. Luke told her about the cattle drive, about the challenges and adventures, about how he had thought of her during the long, lonely nights on the trail. Theresa told him about the small triumphs and setbacks of the past 6 weeks, about how learning to stand up for herself had changed how she saw the world. As night fell, Luke reluctantly stood to leave. "I should go back to the boarding house," he said. "I do not want to damage your reputation." "My reputation survived being seen kissing you in the middle of the street," Theresa pointed out, but she knew he was right. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible," Luke said immediately. "But I want to do it right. I want to buy you a ring, have a proper ceremony, make sure everyone knows you are choosing me just as much as I am choosing you." 2 weeks, Theresa suggested. "That gives us time to arrange things properly." 2 weeks, Luke agreed. "I will talk to the minister tomorrow." He kissed her goodnight, long and sweet, and Theresa felt the promise of forever in that kiss. After he left, she sat by her window and watched the stars come out, marveling at how much her life had changed in just 6 weeks. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Luke met with the minister and arranged for the wedding. He also went to Mr. Chen's store and bought a simple gold ring, which he showed to Theresa with pride. It was not fancy, but it was solid and real, and Theresa loved it. Theresa worked with May to create a new dress for the wedding, a simple but elegant cream-colored gown that made her feel beautiful. May refused payment, saying it was her wedding gift. "You have become like a daughter to me," May said, tears in her eyes as she adjusted the fit. "I am so happy you found someone who deserves you." Mrs. O'Brien insisted on hosting a wedding supper at the boarding house, inviting half the town. Even some of the women who had shunned Theresa began to thaw, impressed by Luke's obvious devotion, and Theresa's transformation from desperate widow to successful tradeswoman. Martha Henderson, of course, had plenty of negative things to say, but most people ignored her. The tide of public opinion had shifted, and Theresa found herself being treated with respect and even admiration. The night before the wedding, Luke came to Theresa's cabin one last time as a single man. They sat together on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Are you nervous?" Luke asked, holding her hand. "A little," Theresa admitted. "It feels almost too good to be true, like I am going to wake up and discover this was all a dream." Luke squeezed her hand. "It is real," he said firmly. "I am real, and what I feel for you is real, and tomorrow we are going to stand in front of everyone we know and promise to spend the rest of our lives together." "I love you," Theresa said, the first time she had spoken the words aloud. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day in the general store when you looked at me like I mattered." "I love you too," Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you from the moment you tried to refuse my help, because your pride would not let you accept what you thought was charity. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I cannot wait to make you my wife." They kissed as the sun set, painting them both in golden light, and Theresa felt complete in a way she never had before. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not desperate or dependent, but solid and real and built on mutual respect and admiration. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for a wedding. Theresa dressed with May's help, pinning up her hair and adding small wildflowers that Luke had picked and left for her. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman transformed, confident, happy, and ready to begin a new chapter of her life. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of town. It was not fancy, but it was filled with people who had come to wish them well. Mr. and Mrs. Chen were there, along with Mrs. O'Brien and the schoolteacher and the doctor's family. Even some of the cowboys from Morrison's ranch had come, men who worked with Luke and respected him. When Luke saw Theresa walking down the aisle, his face lit up with such joy and love that Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. He looked handsome in his best suit, his hair carefully combed, his gray eyes fixed on her with absolute devotion. They stood before the minister and spoke their vows, promising to love and honor each other through good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as they both lived. When Luke slipped the gold ring onto her finger, Theresa felt the last piece of her broken heart heal completely. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Luke pulled Theresa into his arms and kissed her deeply, and the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning, and Luke tucked Theresa's hand into the crook of his arm as they walked back down the aisle together, united before God and everyone they knew. The wedding supper at Mrs. O'Brien's boarding house was a joyous affair. There was food and music and dancing, and Theresa felt surrounded by love and community in a way she had never experienced before. Even some of the women who had been cold to her came to offer congratulations and well wishes. Late in the evening, Luke pulled Theresa aside for a private moment. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face. "Happier than I have ever been in my life," Theresa said honestly. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for believing in me." "Thank you for giving me a home," Luke replied, "for being my everything." They left the party soon after, riding together on Luke's horse out to Morrison's ranch and the cabin that would be their home during the week. It was larger than Theresa's cabin, with a real bedroom and a sitting area and a kitchen with a good stove. Luke carried her over the threshold, and they both laughed at the silly tradition. That night, they truly became husband and wife, and Theresa discovered that physical love could be tender and passionate and deeply connecting when it was built on true affection and respect. Luke was careful and attentive, making sure she was comfortable, and Theresa felt cherished in a way she never had before. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Luke stroked her hair. "I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy," he promised. "You already make me happy," Theresa said, "just by being you." The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Luke threw himself into his work as foreman, and Morrison quickly recognized that he had made an excellent choice. The ranch ran more smoothly under Luke's management, and the cowboys respected his fair but firm leadership. Theresa continued her work with May, riding into town twice a week to deliver and pick up sewing projects. On Sundays, Luke's day off, they stayed at Theresa's cabin, tending the garden and enjoying the quiet. Gradually, those Sundays became Theresa's favorite time, just the two of them with no obligations or responsibilities beyond each other. 3 months after the wedding, Theresa realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Luke her suspicion. "A baby," Luke said, his face going through a dozen emotions in seconds: surprise, joy, fear, and finally settling on overwhelming happiness. "We are going to have a baby, I think so," Theresa said, smiling at his reaction. "I will visit the doctor to be certain, but all the signs are there." Luke pulled her into a gentle embrace, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "You are going to be a mother. We are going to be a family." "We already are a family," Theresa pointed out. "The baby just makes it bigger." The doctor confirmed the pregnancy, saying the baby would likely arrive in early spring. Luke became even more protective and attentive, insisting that Theresa cut back on her work and rest more. Theresa, feeling healthy and strong, compromised by reducing her trips to town to once a week. As her pregnancy progressed, Theresa found herself thinking about the future in new ways. She wanted their child to grow up feeling loved and secure, never doubting their worth the way she had doubted hers. She and Luke talked about their hopes and dreams, about the values they wanted to instill, about the kind of parents they hoped to be. In February of 1879, on a cold but clear night, Theresa went into labor. Luke rode frantically to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Chen, who had offered to help with the birth. For the next 12 hours, Theresa labored while Luke paced outside, terrified and helpless. Finally, as dawn broke, the baby's first cry rang out. The doctor came out to find Luke and grinned. "You have a son," he said. "A healthy boy with strong lungs, and your wife did beautifully." Luke rushed inside to find Theresa exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet Thomas," she said softly. "Thomas Robert Quincy." Luke sat carefully on the edge of the bed and peered at his son's tiny, scrunched face. "He is perfect," Luke said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you for this, Theresa. Thank you for everything." They spent the next hour just marveling at the miracle they had created, counting tiny fingers and toes, watching Thomas sleep peacefully. Theresa felt a love so fierce and protective it almost hurt, and when she looked at Luke, she saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. The first year of Thomas's life was exhausting but wonderful. Theresa had to temporarily stop her sewing work to care for the baby, but May was understanding, saying the work would be there when she was ready to return. Luke took on extra responsibilities at the ranch to make up for the lost income, and they made it work through careful budgeting and teamwork. Thomas proved to be a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. He had Luke's gray eyes and Theresa's dark hair, and everyone who met him remarked on what a beautiful child he was. Luke was a devoted father, rushing home from work each evening to spend time with his son, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, and telling him stories about horses and cattle, even though Thomas was too young to understand. On their first wedding anniversary, Luke surprised Theresa with a gift, a beautiful wooden cradle he had carved himself during quiet moments at the ranch. It was inlaid with delicate patterns, and he had carved both their names and Thomas's into the headboard, along with the date of Thomas's birth. "It is for our son," Luke said, "and for all the children we will have, a family heirloom." Theresa ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. "It is beautiful. You made this." "I wanted to create something that would last," Luke said. "Something that would remind our children and grandchildren that they come from love." That night, after Thomas was asleep in his new cradle, Theresa and Luke made love slowly and tenderly, reaffirming their commitment to each other and their family. Afterward, Theresa told Luke what she had been thinking about for weeks. "I want to sell my old cabin," she said. "I think it is time. We have built our life here at the ranch, and I do not need that place anymore. The money could help us save toward buying our own property someday." Luke was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure? That cabin was yours before we met. I do not want you to feel like you are giving up your independence." "I am not giving up anything," Theresa said firmly. "I am choosing our future together. The cabin served its purpose, but I do not need it anymore. I have everything I need right here." They sold the cabin the following month to a young couple just starting out, and Theresa felt only relief and satisfaction as she signed over the deed. The money went into their savings, a nest egg toward their dream of owning a small ranch of their own someday. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, Theresa gradually returned to her sewing work, this time bringing the projects home and working while Thomas napped or played. May adjusted their partnership to accommodate Theresa's changed circumstances, and the arrangement worked well for both of them. Luke continued to excel in his position as foreman, and Morrison rewarded his hard work with raises and bonuses. They saved diligently, adding to their nest egg month by month, working toward their goal of independence. When Thomas was 2 years old, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise and more of a celebration. They had hoped for more children, and the timing felt right. "Maybe a daughter this time," Luke said hopefully, his hand on Theresa's belly. "Maybe," Theresa agreed, "but another son would be wonderful too." Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, was born in the spring of 1881. She had Luke's coloring but Theresa's delicate features, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Thomas, now old enough to understand, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. As their children grew, Luke and Theresa worked tirelessly to build their future. They saved and planned and dreamed, and in the fall of 1883, their dream finally came true. Morrison sold them a piece of his ranch at a fair price, 200 acres with good grazing land and a creek running through it. It was not huge, but it was theirs, and it was enough to start their own small herd. Luke built them a house with his own hands, larger than the foreman's cabin, with bedrooms for the children and a big kitchen for Theresa. It took months of hard work, with help from the cowboys at Morrison's ranch, but when it was finished, it was solid and beautiful and home. They moved in on a bright October day, carrying their few possessions and their 2 excited children into their own home on their own land. That night, after the children were asleep, Luke and Theresa stood on their front porch and looked out at their property. "We did it," Theresa said softly. "We actually did it." "We did," Luke agreed, pulling her close. "From that first day in the general store to right here, right now, you brought everything I needed, Theresa. Everything." "You brought everything I needed too," Theresa said, leaning into his embrace. "Love, respect, partnership, family. Everything." They stood together in the moonlight, watching the stars come out over their land, their children sleeping safely inside their house. And Theresa felt a peace and contentment she had never imagined possible all those years ago, when she stood in Fort Lyon as a mocked and penniless widow. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranching was hard work, and there were setbacks and challenges. Droughts came and tested their resources. Harsh winters took some of their cattle. There were lean years when they had to tighten their belts and work even harder. But they faced everything together, as partners, and that made all the difference. Thomas grew into a strong, capable boy who loved working with his father on the ranch. Margaret was more interested in books and learning, and Theresa worked with her to make sure she got a good education. In 1886, they welcomed a third child, another son they named James, and their family felt complete. Theresa continued her sewing work, which provided steady income and kept her connected to the community. She and May remained close friends, and May's children and Theresa's children grew up together, playing and learning and building their own friendships. Luke proved to be a skilled rancher, and their small operation grew steadily. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable and secure, with a roof over their heads and food on the table and money set aside for emergencies. More importantly, they had each other and their children, and that was worth more than all the gold in Colorado. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Luke surprised Theresa with a trip to Denver, leaving the children with the Chens for 3 days. It was the first time they had been alone together since before Thomas was born, and they reveled in the freedom and romance of it. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through the city streets holding hands like young sweethearts. On their last evening, Luke bought Theresa a beautiful shawl from a fancy shop, soft wool dyed a deep blue that matched her eyes. "You did not have to do this," Theresa protested, though she could not stop touching the soft fabric. "I wanted to," Luke said. "You work so hard taking care of the children and the house and your sewing business. I wanted to give you something just for you, something beautiful." That night in their hotel room, they made love with the passion and tenderness of people who had weathered life's storms together and emerged stronger. Afterward, lying in Luke's arms, Theresa reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. "You ever think about that first day?" she asked. "When you bought me those beans in the general store, all the time," Luke admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding on by, minding my own business. What would have happened if I had not stopped that day?" "I would have survived," Theresa said honestly. "I always survived. But I would not have lived, not really. You taught me the difference between surviving and living, between being alone and being loved." "You taught me that too," Luke said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, going from job to job with no real purpose. You gave me something to work for, something to build toward. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living." They talked late into the night, remembering the early days of their courtship, laughing about mistakes and misunderstandings, marveling at how much their lives had changed. When they finally fell asleep, it was tangled together, content and complete. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the growing of their children. Thomas, at 12, was already a skilled rider and roper, working alongside his father with pride. Margaret, at 10, had a gift for numbers and helped Theresa keep the ranch books. James, at 6, was the wild one, always getting into mischief and making them laugh with his antics. In the spring of 1889, Theresa realized she was pregnant again, a surprise at 35 years old but a welcome one. Luke was delighted, though worried about Theresa's health given her age. But Theresa remained healthy and strong throughout the pregnancy, and in December, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a miracle baby, the last child they would have, and she was adored by her older siblings and parents alike. Thomas, now 13, was old enough to help care for her, and he took his role as oldest brother seriously. Margaret loved having a baby sister to dote on, and James thought she was funny, making her laugh with his silly faces. As the 1890s began, the Quincy ranch was thriving. They had expanded their herd to over 200 cattle, built a proper barn, and added on to the house to accommodate their growing family. Luke had earned a reputation as a fair and honest rancher, and his advice was often sought by neighbors and other ranchers. Theresa's sewing business had evolved into a successful enterprise, with May now working for her as much as she worked for May. They employed 2 other women as well, creating a small network of skilled seamstresses who could handle large orders for stores in Denver and Colorado Springs. Fort Lyon had grown and prospered too, with new businesses and families arriving regularly. The railroad had come through in 1887, making travel and shipping easier and connecting their small community to the wider world. But despite the changes, the core of the town remained the same: hardworking people trying to build good lives. Martha Henderson, never one to admit she had been wrong, had left Fort Lyon in 1885 to move to Denver with her husband. Few people missed her, and Theresa was relieved not to have to deal with her constant judgment and gossip. The other women of Fort Lyon had long since accepted Theresa as one of their own, respecting the life she and Luke had built through hard work and determination. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1893, Luke and Theresa threw a party at their ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. It was a beautiful summer day, and they set up tables outside, with food and music and dancing. Their children ran wild with other ranch children, playing games and getting into harmless trouble. As the sun set and the party wound down, Luke pulled Theresa aside for a private moment. They walked down to the creek that ran through their property, the same creek where Luke had once picked wildflowers for her. 15 years, Luke said, putting his arm around her waist. 15 years since I walked into that general store and met the woman who changed my life. 16 years since we married, Theresa corrected with a smile. Though I suppose it all started that day in the store. You ever regret it? Luke asked. Marrying a drifting cowboy with no money and uncertain prospects? Theresa turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands. Not for a single second, she said firmly. You were right. All those years ago, I did not need money or land or a fancy name. I just needed someone who saw me, who valued me for who I was rather than what I had. You gave me that and so much more. Luke kissed her deeply, and after all these years, Theresa still felt the same thrill, the same sense of rightness and home. When they broke apart, both were smiling. I love you, Luke said, more now than ever before. I love you too, Theresa replied, more than words can say. They walked back to the party hand in hand, ready to celebrate with their friends and family, grateful for the life they had built and the love that sustained them through everything. The years continued to flow by, bringing more changes and challenges. In 1895, Thomas left home to work on a large ranch in Wyoming, eager to make his own way in the world. It was hard letting him go, but Theresa and Luke had raised him to be independent and capable, and they were proud of the young man he had become. Margaret, now 14, announced her intention to become a teacher, and Theresa made sure she got the education she needed, sending her to a teaching college in Colorado Springs. It was expensive, but worth it to see their daughter pursuing her dreams. James, at 11, showed signs of being a natural rancher like his father, and he spent every spare moment working with the cattle and horses. Elizabeth, at 6, was the baby of the family and still got away with more than her siblings ever had. In 1898, When Theresa was 44 years old and Luke was 45, they faced their first real crisis. A harsh winter killed a third of their herd, and a drop in cattle prices meant they could not afford to replace them immediately. For the first time in years, they had to tighten their belts and worry about money, but they faced it together, as they had faced everything else. They sold some land to raise cash, cut back on expenses, and worked harder than ever. Theresa took on more sewing orders, and Luke hired himself out for occasional work on neighboring ranches. It was a difficult year, but they survived it, and by the following spring they were rebuilding. Thomas, hearing of their troubles, sent money from his wages in Wyoming. Margaret, now working as a teacher, sent what she could spare from her small salary. The children's contributions touched Theresa and Luke deeply, proof that they had raised generous, loving children who cared about family. By 1900, as the new century dawned, the Quincy ranch was stable again, with a rebuilt herd and renewed prospects. Thomas returned home from Wyoming, bringing with him a sweet young woman named Sarah whom he planned to marry. Luke and Theresa welcomed Sarah into the family with open arms, thrilled to see their son so happy and in love. The wedding was held at the ranch in June of 1900, and it reminded Theresa so much of her own wedding to Luke 22 years earlier. The same joy, the same hope, the same sense of two people committing to build a life together no matter what challenges they might face. After the wedding, Thomas and Sarah stayed at the ranch, with Thomas taking on more and more responsibility for running the operation as Luke began to slow down. At 47, Luke was still strong and capable, but years of hard physical labor had taken their toll. His hands ached in the mornings and he tired more easily than he used to. Theresa, at 46, had her own aches and pains, but she remained active and engaged. Her sewing business was now run mostly by the younger women she had trained, with Theresa serving more as a consultant and designer than a seamstress. She enjoyed the work, but appreciated having more time to spend with her family. In 1901, Thomas and Sarah presented them with their first grandchild, a baby boy they named Lucas Robert after both his grandfather and his late great-uncle. Holding his grandson for the first time, Luke wept openly, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life and the continuation of their family line. Theresa, watching her husband cradle their grandchild with such tenderness and wonder, felt her heart swell with love. This was what they had built, not just a ranch or a business, but a family, a legacy of love and hard work and determination that would continue long after they were gone. Margaret married in 1902, wedding a fellow teacher named Henry, and they moved to Denver where they both taught at a large school. James, at 18, showed no interest in leaving the ranch, content to work alongside his father and brother building the family business. Elizabeth, at 12, was showing signs of being artistic, spending hours drawing and painting the landscapes around their ranch. As the years passed, Luke and Theresa gradually retired from active ranch management, turning over operations to Thomas while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They spent their days working in their garden, riding their horses through the land they had fought so hard to keep, and playing with their growing number of grandchildren. By 1905, they had 4 grandchildren: Lucas Robert, his younger sister Anne, and Margaret's twin boys, William and Henry Jr. The ranch house, expanded several times over the years, was filled with noise and laughter whenever the whole family gathered, which happened often. On a warm summer evening in 1906, Luke and Theresa sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They were both in their 50s now, their hair graying and their faces lined with the marks of time and hard work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been 28 years ago, a lonely cowboy and a widow with no prospects, finding love in the most unexpected place. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Theresa asked, taking Luke's hand. "When I told you I had nothing to offer, you bring everything I need," Luke said immediately. "And I meant it, Theresa. Every word." "You gave me everything I needed too," Theresa said. "A partnership built on respect, children to love, a home and a life that mattered." "You saved me, Luke, in ways I did not even know I needed saving." "We saved each other," Luke corrected gently. "I was lost before I met you, Theresa, drifting through life with no anchor, no purpose. You gave me a reason to stop running and start building. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family. Sarah preparing dinner, James and Elizabeth arguing good-naturedly about something, the baby crying and being soothed. "I would not change a single thing," Theresa said softly. "Not one moment, not one decision. It has all been perfect, even the hard parts." "Especially the hard parts," Luke agreed. "They made us stronger, made us appreciate what we had." As the years continued to pass, Luke and Theresa watched their children and grandchildren grow and thrive. Thomas proved to be an even better rancher than Luke had been, expanding the operation and making the Quincy name synonymous with quality cattle throughout Colorado. Sarah was a loving wife and mother, caring for her growing family with grace and patience. Margaret and Henry had 2 more children, bringing their total to 4, and they were doing important work in Denver, educating children who might otherwise have no opportunities. James married a local girl named Rebecca in 1908, and they settled in a house on the ranch property, working alongside Thomas to manage the expanding operation. Elizabeth, showing real artistic talent, went to study art in California when she was 18, the first of their children to go so far from home. It was hard letting her go, but Theresa and Luke encouraged her to follow her dreams, knowing that she would always have a home to return to. In 1910, Fort Lyon celebrated its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town, and Luke and Theresa were honored as pioneers who had helped build the community. They sat on the stage during the celebration, surrounded by friends and family, and listened as the mayor talked about the values of hard work, determination, and love that had made Fort Lyon thrive. After the speeches, several people came up to thank them for various things. Theresa for teaching their daughters to sew, Luke for helping them get started in ranching, both of them for being examples of what was possible through dedication and partnership. Mr. Chen, now very old but still running his general store with help from his children, made a point of seeking them out. "Do you remember the first day you met?" he asked with a knowing smile. "In my store." "I remember every detail," Theresa said, squeezing Luke's hand. "It was the day my life changed." "Mine too," Luke added. "The day I stopped running and started living." Mr. Chen nodded sagely. "I knew that day you were meant for each other. I saw it in how you looked at each other even then. Like you recognized something in the other person that you had been missing." His words stayed with Theresa long after the celebration ended. It was true. She had recognized something in Luke that first day, some quality of genuine kindness and respect that was so rare in her experience. And he had recognized something in her too, strength and dignity that no amount of poverty could diminish. As they entered their 60s, Luke and Theresa's lives settled into a gentle rhythm of family gatherings, quiet days on the ranch, and the deep contentment of a life well lived. They were not wealthy in money, but they were rich beyond measure in love and family and legacy. In 1915, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a huge party at the ranch, attended by nearly 100 people. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends, neighbors, and business associates. Thomas gave a speech thanking his parents for building something lasting, for showing all of them what real love and partnership looked like. Margaret read a poem she had written about her parents' love story, and there was not a dry eye in the crowd by the time she finished. James presented them with a beautiful photograph he had commissioned. Luke and Theresa standing on their porch, surrounded by their entire family, 4 generations captured in one perfect moment. Elizabeth, home from California for the celebration, had painted a portrait of her parents as they had looked on their wedding day, based on descriptions, and one faded photograph. It showed a handsome young cowboy and a beautiful young woman in a blue dress, looking at each other with love and hope shining in their eyes. "So that is what we looked like," Luke said softly, studying the painting. "So young and full of dreams." "We made those dreams come true," Theresa reminded him. "Every single one of them." That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was finally quiet, Luke and Theresa lay in bed together, talking in the darkness like they had done for nearly 4 decades. "If you could go back," Luke asked, "back to that day in the general store, knowing everything you know now, would you still say yes?" "Without hesitation," Theresa said firmly. "You are my home, Luke. You always have been. From that very first day, you made me feel like I belonged somewhere, like I mattered to someone. That is a gift beyond price." "You gave me the same gift," Luke said, pulling her close. "A place to belong, a reason to stay, a love worth building a life around. You brought everything I needed, Theresa. Everything." They fell asleep in each other's arms, content and complete, surrounded by the evidence of their love. A thriving ranch, a strong family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The years that followed were gentler, slower, but no less sweet. Luke and Theresa spent their days doing small chores, visiting with family, and simply being together. They watched as their grandchildren grew up and started families of their own, as the ranch continued to prosper under Thomas and James's management, as their daughters made their marks on the world in their own ways. In 1920, on a warm spring afternoon, Luke and Theresa sat together in their garden, the same garden Theresa had struggled to maintain all those years ago when she was a widow with no prospects. Now it was large and lush, tended lovingly by multiple generations of the family. Luke, now 67 years old, was frailer than he had been, his once strong body worn down by years of hard labor. But his eyes were still clear and bright when he looked at Theresa, still filled with the same love that had been there from the beginning. Theresa, at 66, had aged more gracefully, her hair silver but her back still straight, her hands still nimble. She held Luke's hand gently, aware that their time together was growing shorter, determined to treasure every moment that remained. No regrets. Luke asked quietly, a question he had asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Theresa answered, as she always did. "You gave me everything, Luke. A lifetime of love, a family to cherish, a home that was truly ours. What more could anyone want?" "I love you," Luke said simply. "More now than ever before." "I love you too," Theresa replied, "forever and always." They sat together in the garden, watching the sun move across the sky, content in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful and lasting, that their love story would be told and retold by their children and grandchildren for generations to come. And when Luke passed away peacefully in his sleep, a few months later, surrounded by family and holding Theresa's hand, he died knowing he had lived a full and meaningful life, loved and loving to the very end. Theresa lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, active and engaged until the very end. She continued to tell stories about Luke, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had never known him. She talked about that first meeting in the general store, about how a simple act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. When Theresa finally passed away in 1928 at the age of 74, she was buried next to Luke on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their headstone, carved with both their names and the dates of their lives, bore a simple inscription chosen by their children. "You brought everything I needed." The Quincy Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to the love and hard work of the cowboy and the widow who had built something beautiful from nothing. And in Fort Lyon, their story became legend, told and retold as an example of what true love could accomplish, how two people with nothing but each other could create a legacy that would endure forever. The town changed and grew over the decades that followed, but the story of Luke and Theresa Quincy remained, a reminder that the things that truly matter in life are not wealth or status or what others think, but love and respect and partnership, the willingness to see value in another person when the rest of the world looks away, and the courage to build a life together no matter what challenges might come. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on parts of the original ranch land, still tell stories about the cowboy who said, "You bring everything I need," to a widow with no dowry, and the woman who had the courage to believe him, to take a chance on love when everything in her life had taught her to expect disappointment. It was a love story that began in hardship and grew through dedication, that weathered every storm and emerged stronger, that created ripples extending far beyond two people in a small Colorado town. It was proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places, and that the greatest riches in life are not material wealth, but the love we share, and the families we build, and the legacy we leave behind. And though Luke and Theresa are long gone now, their love story lives on, inspiring new generations to believe in the transformative power of love, to see beyond surface appearances to the true worth of a person, and to have the courage to build something beautiful even when circumstances seem impossible. That is the real legacy of the cowboy and the widow, not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a reminder that love, when built on respect and partnership and genuine care for another person, can overcome any obstacle and create something that lasts forever.